Speaking of my man Joe Milton, who everybody knows I love, and I got no question about him starting the whole season. Ain't no Nico. Who? Yeah, I'm moving that. How do you even know how to pronounce that name? Because people give me a hard time that I'm too hard on Joe Milton. Joe Milton, kudos, my man. Fourth rated quarterback in the SEC. Admittedly, a down year for quarterbacks in the SEC because you lose guys like Bryce Young, Will Levis, who got a lot of pub, Anthony Richardson, who was at SEC Media Days last year as well. So you tend to have this weird flow at SEC Media Days where there'll be like 6 or 7, 8 quarterbacks, and then the next year there'll be like 2. And I don't know if that's coincidence or what, but it seems to happen that way. And it's happening this way for Tennessee. And Joe Milton is one of the higher rated quarterbacks in the SEC, partly because of what he's done in his passing camps, in games, in his ability to show off his big arm. But part of that is because some other quarterbacks have moved along. It's unfortunate because I like Joe Milton better than Will Levis and Anthony Richardson. But if we were doing this rating with some sort of combination of last year and both, he could be like 7th or 8th on the list because he would be behind Bryce Young. But in this particular case, he's the 4th rated quarterback in the SEC. I will go ahead and tell you this. This is a guarantee. Will you please write this one down? If Joe Milton at the end of the year is rated 4th or better as a quarterback in the SEC among his peers, Tennessee will be 10-2. Tennessee will be a top 5. Notice I gave myself an out for the college football playoff, but they will be a top 5 team at the end of the year, either in the college football playoff or knocking at the door. They'll be at least 10-2 if he's a top 4 quarterback in the SEC. Boom. Done. There's in my mind, there's no argument. You can argue it, but in my mind, I'm settled on that one.
Yeah, I'm going to argue it.
Oh, there he goes. There he goes.
I think Joe Milton's going to have to do it. If Joe Milton's just number 4, look, he's going to have to be Hendon Hooker level to beat Alabama or Georgia again. So if he's number 4, Tennessee's losing to Alabama and Georgia. They're losing to both teams, if that's the case. Then there's the issue of they still have to visit Florida and Kentucky. And if he's just 4th, they could lose to one of those. So, and I'm looking at the QBs ahead of him. KJ Jefferson is number 1, and I understand that, but I'm sorry. I am not a believer in Dan Enos. I don't think he's that good of an offensive coordinator. So I think Sam Pittman massively downgraded. So I think KJ Jefferson is going to be a downgrade. So at that point, you've got Jaden Daniels and Devin Leary at Kentucky. Look, I'm not as high on Devin Leary as a lot of other people are either. I think Liam Cohen is a great pickup for Kentucky. Bringing him back as offensive coordinator is brilliant for Kentucky, but they're still going to get by on their defense, and that's going to be the concern. So look, if Joe Milton is not top 3, I see Tennessee losing to Alabama, Georgia, and either Florida, Missouri, or Kentucky. One of the 3.
Man, I'm so down on Florida, Missouri, and Kentucky. Of those 3, I guess I'm highest on Kentucky because I think that they'll kind of get back to basics and not push so much in Will Levis's face. But that brings up an interesting topic of a conversation. Which quarterback are you most concerned about if you're a Tennessee football fan? We'll tell you right after this. And there's that Rattler guy that we got to bring up. I know a lot of people don't even want to hear his name. In 2 minutes, we'll have more. But listen, I think if Joe Milton is considered one of the top 4 quarterbacks in the nation, I think that's a pretty good start and pretty good respect for not only Josh Heupel, but also for Tennessee's system. And when I look at Milton, you see a lot of the ability, but again, I go back to there's been one statement, and we would hear stuff. Fred Watt said we would hear stuff. There's been one statement by Dennis Dodd of CBS Sports that questioned whether or not Nico was worth it. That's been really the only outlandish statement about Tennessee's quarterback situation. Somebody would have heard that Joe Milton is not quite ready, whereas I've heard nothing but good things about Joe Milton. So I'm not surprised he's in the top 4 with his quarterback class in the SEC.
I'm not either. I'm just saying he needs to be higher as the year goes on. I don't blame him. I don't blame Brad Crawford at 247 for putting him at 4. But every time Josh Heupel has coached in the SEC now as an offensive coordinator or head coach for 4 years, 2 years at Missouri, 2 years at Tennessee. All 4 of those years, his quarterback was a top 2 quarterback in the SEC, I would say. And Drew Lock was arguably the best quarterback in the SEC those 2 years in 2016 and 2017 when he was there. And then Hendon Hooker was definitely top 2 the last 2 years. I argue the best last year, but somehow Stetson Bennett got the invite to New York over Hendon Hooker. So if Joe Milton is down to number 4, I mean, Dave, that's not a mild drop off at quarterback play if he's down at number 4 in a year of bad SEC quarterback play, when Hendon Hooker was number 1 in a year of great SEC quarterback play. So I mean,
So let me stop you for a second. You think Hendon Hooker was better than Bryce Young last year?
As a player, Bryce Young was better, but I'm saying just in terms of production. If I'm ranking quarterbacks just in terms of production last year, you have to put Hendon Hooker ahead of Bryce Young. I don't think now. Look, I would take Bryce Young over Hendon Hooker. That part's very clear. I'd take Bryce Young over Hendon Hooker. But I think just in terms of I'm looking at this ranking in terms of production. So Hooker's production did outdo Bryce Young's production last year. Not Bryce Young's fault. A lot of other factors in play. And based on Heupel's system, I think any quarterback, if you go from number 1 in the SEC to production to number 4 in the SEC in production, I mean, that's a huge drop off at quarterback play.
Well, I don't think it's going to be as huge this year because I don't think the quarterbacks are as good. So I think 1 and 4 could be a lot closer than 1 and 4 last year.
Well, that's why 4. That's what I mean, though, because the SEC quarterbacks are worse this year. Going from 1 in a year where the SEC quarterbacks are loaded to 4 in a year when the SEC quarterbacks are not as good, that's an even bigger drop off at that point.
Yeah, but here's the best way I can describe my thoughts on it. If you got number 1 Bryce Young, and I thought he was on a level by himself, even though statistically Hendon Hooker may have been better. Bryce Young got them out of all kinds of problems. If you go a step down to Hendon Hooker, who's been one of the most productive quarterbacks in SEC football history in that one season, and to me, there was a massive step down to 3. I think that the 4 guys that we're getting ready to talk about could all be at a high level, but maybe not reach what Hendon or Bryce Young has done.